Good morning, guys. I guess today we're going to talk about enclosures because I'm reading through comments on here, and a lot of people just had enclosure comments. We'll start at the basics. One of the guys was like, what software do I use to design enclosures and everything that would help noobs? And my God, I guess we're just going to start easy. I don't use software at all. I like using a tape measure, pen, paper, and the calculator on my iPhone. It's always done me really well, and the whole time I've been building enclosures, that is what I've used. I mean, there are good programs out there, I guess, like WinISD or whatever it's called. The problem with that is it don't take into consideration your cabin gain or how an enclosure act in a car or anything. And I've always done it the old hillbilly way. So I stick with that. I said in one of my other videos, a number that you'll have to remember and you'll learn by heart is 1728. You measure in inches, your width, height, depth. You divide by 1728, that gives you your internal enclosure volume. If you're measuring internal specs, which you should be, which gets kind of tricky sometimes, because if you're doing like 2 layers of wood on each side, you got 3/4, it'd be a 1/2 inch over here and a 1/2 inch over here. So over your overall width, you got to subtract 3 inches, but you'll learn how to do it after a while. On regular old ported boxes, man, back in the day, I would always use 15 square inches, which would be 3 by 5, etc., of port area per cubic foot. Now that we're in the era of really high X-Max subwoofers and everything, of course that'll change. Sometimes you do more, a little more port area per cube, and then there's make a box a little smaller, or considerably smaller in some cases, than what a subwoofer costs for if you're going to use a ton of power. And this day and age, everybody's using a ton of power, or they should be. I mean, you get louder with a ton of power. I like using a ton of power, but there's just so much you can get into on subwoofer enclosures. Even the fact that when you have multiple subwoofers sharing an enclosure, you can drop the enclosure volume down quite a bit. Now, all of this info, use at your own risk, because there's only so much you can do, but there's a lot of little tricks. I can't really just tell you off the top of my head how much you can drop enclosure volume when multiple subs shared that, or using a lot of power. This is just stuff you got to learn on your own, or get help building an enclosure. That's one of the best ways to learn is, find you a good enclosure builder, talk to them, and if they're going to build your enclosure, help them do it. Try to learn something. Or if they're selling you a design, see if you can get a hand in on that and ask questions about what does what. But we're going to roll into I guess one of the most easy enclosures to build is a sealed enclosure. I don't really prefer sealed enclosures. They sound great though. I mean, they do sound really good. But they don't seem to get as loud as a ported enclosure. And then rolling from that, you have fourth orders. Myself, I have only built one fourth order in my life, and it was for a little 8 and a Maserati. And I got lucky because I just kind of did a little bit of research and built it, tuned it, and it sounded really, really good for what the guy did with the car. He liked listening to a lot of rock music and some really old school rap, and the enclosure did really good for that. He was also running a big 5-channel amp in the car, so it wasn't getting a ton of power. But that was the only enclosure fourth order that I had ever built. I don't know why I chose a fourth order for the car. But I did. It was, a little 8. We tried to keep the car really clean looking with the install and everything. And I actually built a fourth order that was kind of long. Fired the port up at the end of at the very end of the enclosure. And the car had a factory subwoofer that was, I can't remember what brand, like Bose or something, but it was really a cheesy subwoofer. And I actually fired the port straight up through the factory subwoofer hole. I don't know enough about fourth orders to design them or build them for anybody, but I know how they work and how band passes work in general. And this is kind of how I explain it to people. Put your phone on music playing, like, through the speaker on the phone. Listen to it and then put it in a cup. And how it gets louder in the cup is how a bandpass enclosure works. With the fourth order, you have the sealed section playing your lows, and the top chamber with the port kind of amplifies it, and you can tune it with the port. As to where a sixth order does the same thing, but you have 2 different tunings with the port in the back playing your lows and your front port. I'm a lot better at designing these. Actually, I'm really good at designing these things because I don't actually know why I'm good at it. I've only done really well with the sixth order though. But that's kind of your enclosures as a whole. I have people message me all the time and ask for advice on sixth orders. And I have designed some for some people. I usually charge to do it. And I only want to deal with people that are experienced builders and understand everything, because a problem you run into, if you design something for somebody and if you do it all the time for free, then your inbox is going to be blowing up. But the reason I prefer experienced builders, I'm not going to give you a cutout sheet of every board you use. I don't use CAD programs for none of this. I'll be like, what's your measurements for doing your wall? And they'll tell me, and I'll be like, bottom chamber this, top chamber this is your ports, But another problem you can run into, and this happens a lot, is you design something for somebody and they change. You design it with, say, 80 square inches of port, and they get back to you, and the port's supposed to be like 28 inches long to tune it to 24, and they're like, well, I use 30 square inches of port. And I'm like, why? Well, your port was going to be way too long. I had that happen recently. But when people are doing walls, if they run into a slight issue, rather than putting in the work to make everything work out, they'll want to cut a corner. And if they cut a corner on port, especially in a sixth order, if you cut a corner on a port or a chamber volume, you're going to run into issues, because this lower chamber, it works in conjunction with that port. And that port works in conjunction with this port and this top chamber. Everything is just kind of a series. That's why I call it a series tune 6. Works in a series. So, say you change this lower volume, but you don't touch that port, then you're going to throw everything off, because it all works together. So if you change the volume down here, then you need to change that port, because it will affect that tuning. That tuning will affect this tuning. Everything could be off. You need to be like around an octave apart on these tunings. So that's why when you design for people, you really kind of have to, I prefer to have people that are experienced at doing this, because if they change one thing, it's going to throw everything off, and then you're the douchebag that designed them in the box that ain't playing right. So, yeah. I guess we can get into what kind of wood to use. I built this with pine plywood. The cheapest pine plywood I could find. It's 3/4 inch. But it's 3 layers thick everywhere, with a lot of steel bracing in here And there's a lot of steel bracing underneath supporting that baffle, so I have 0 baffle flex. I see a lot of videos that people film at like Sundown and other shows of these big builds, and when they get the camera back here pointing to subs, I'm like, what the hell? Because you can see the baffle like moving and rocking. That is a no-no. That'd destroy subs. Oh, it'd destroy subs, and you're losing dBs with that baffle flexing. But birch, really good wood. Like I said, you can use plywood, double it up or triple it. You know, definitely glue all the layers together with Titebond. That's a big deal. Birch, I'd say if I had it to do over again, one of my favorite types of wood to use would probably be birch, because it's lightweight, easy to work with. The pine ain't bad, it's just the pine's kind of like grainy, you know. They don't spend as much time making the pine nice because it's cheaper. MDF, I hate working with MDF. It's like harder to cut. It creates a crap ton of dust. The corners break off of it really easy if you don't watch what you're doing. I mean, you can get good sound out of it, but God, it's so hard to work with. Definitely I like working with like plywoods better. I built the wife's blazer out of maple, and it is so hard. I mean, you got to be very careful screwing everything together because the wood is so hard, screws that just snap off in it. I only found like one brand of like deck screws that really did good with it. Shout out Deckmate. Deckmate screws did really, really well in that enclosure. It's like the only screw that would like go in consistently without breaking. But that all plays a big part of it, you know, like what you put a box together with. Make sure your cuts are like really, really good and straight, and that everything fits together. And I use Titebond wood glue religiously. If my cuts aren't 100%, which that, you know, I'm only human, they're not. A lot of times you have a little wave in there with a gap, and that's where your PL3X comes in. PL3X, seal it right up. I mean, I'm not the best builder out there. I do get like some, you know, gotten a lot better now that I'm building more, but, you know, we're all human. It happens. But anyway, I hope this kind of covers and helps things out for people. Enclosures are tricky. A good enclosure is the heart of your system, though. Well-tuned, well-built, you get well responses out of it, you know. You want an enclosure that's going to respond good, have good bandwidth and everything. Do a lot of research before you build it. And if you're not confident in building it, have somebody else build it. But keep in mind, you're going to pay $400 or $500 for a good enclosure. I mean, just easily, you know. And I'm not talking something like this. This is thousands. I'm talking just a nice little box for the back of your SUV or trunk. $400 or $500 easy. It costs a lot to build enclosures now with glue, wood, materials. The cost of everything skyrocketed. So keep that in mind. And if you're going to build your own, do your research. But anyway, guys, rambling on again. Peace out, everybody. And as always, base on.